Hi, I want to take just a few minutes of your time to go over the broadest outlines of the discipline we're beginning to study together, philosophy, the love of wisdom. Now, philosophy, as we're going to pay attention to it in our class, has a use for daily life. And in many ways, that is the most exciting aspect of philosophy. However, philosophy itself, in the 2,500 to 3,000 years that it's been practiced, according to the Western tradition, and perhaps even longer according to Eastern traditions, has been considerably larger. So before we adopt our focus of philosophy as therapeutic, is to say, philosophy is a way of making our lives either more meaningful or richer or happier or more virtuous, I'd like to spend a few minutes and look at philosophy as an overall set of concerns and look very briefly at a couple of ways that people have tried to conceptualize dividing up those concerns into reasonable and conceptually clear categories, separate aspects of philosophy, if you will. So I'm going to try and share my screen with you. Let's hope that works. Looks like it's gonna. And I'll just run through this with you really quickly. What is philosophy? Heidegger famously asked that question, and instead of answering it, immediately concludes that to ask the question itself requires engaging in philosophy. So don't expect me to answer that right now. We'll see what Kierkegaard has to say. This is one, at least two really biting things that Kierkegaard has to say about the philosophy that he himself studied. Philosophy is life's dry nurse. You can take care of us, but not suckle us. I'll leave you to ponder that. Another one that I don't have down verbatim, but I'll give you the gist of it. Kierkegaard also says at one point, rather one of his pseudonymous authors says, philosophy is like a sign you might see in a shop window. The sign might read, pants pressed here. So you would bring in your pants, hoping to have them pressed, only to be disappointed when you're told, oh, we only sell signs. Now, our endeavor in this class is going to be to make that not turn out to be the case. We'd like to get beyond mere signs and down to the nitty gritty of proving our own lies and seeing if philosophy can help us do that. But for now, let's keep an open mind and see what else philosophy can do. Next slide here. Okay, philosophy is a compound. This is something we pointed out in almost any introductory lecture. From the ancient Greek, that's where the word originates. Philos, meaning loving or to love. Think of the word Philadelphia, or philately is that the word for people who collect stamps? I can think of several others where the philo aspect of things is stressed, meaning it's a passion. It's not necessarily either an action or an idea. It's a passion, right? Though it's in many cases the action is engaging in ideas and a passion for them verbally. So what's in her name? The other part of this, Sophos, it's a masculine ending, but it's traceable back to Sophia, the Greek goddess of wisdom. Some of you may be familiar with her too from Christian context. Of course, the early Christians, the language of the realm. In many cases, the written language of the realm was some kind of Greek called Koine Greek, and so Sophia will become known to some of you that way as that sort of wisdom that's praised but also restricted in the scriptures. Anyway, basically put the two together and you get that philosophy is indeed the love of wisdom. There was a philosopher named John Wisdom who suggested that there's no reason we couldn't run it the other way around and call it the wisdom of love. I think the only reason we might not want to do that, well, maybe two. One is I'm not really sure what that would mean, though it does sound really cool. And the other is I don't think etymologically you can do that without breaking the grammatical rules of ancient Greek. But be that as it may, maybe we can just go with it. It has something to do with love, something to do with wisdom, whatever those things may be. Okay, it's customary on occasion to break philosophy up into three main branches. What are the things that philosophy talks about in general from a very, very, very broad perspective? Well, it talks about what's out there, what's there, assuming there is an out to there. What's there? What's real? And when philosophy touches on those things, it's engaging in what is sometimes called ontology. More generally, it's engaging in metaphysics, which is a word that is much maligned and much misused. Um, but for now, let's simply say that it's not physics, it's what physics can't address, but maybe would like to. Right? Philosophy also deals with the theory of knowledge, and the word for that that you want to get familiar with is epistemology. That's also coming from the Greek. Basically means the logic or the reasoned account of that which one knows, right? So a theory of knowledge. It's not enough just to say, I know what's there now. Well, if you've answered that question, you've done great philosophical work, right? But how do you know that you know what's there? That's another question, right? At least once it becomes a question, it's a question that probably is going to nag until it's answered. So people have tried to address that question too. But it's not just a matter of what you think the world is like and what you think about your thinking about it. The philosophy deals with, even in this very broad tripartite way of conceptualizing it, it also deals with what you feel like should be done, or what your reactions, whether you think is beautiful or ugly, what you found when you look at these other two things. In short, it also deals with values and desires. And so a theory of value is a sort of a necessary third part of this tripartite broad taxonomy of what philosophy might be. This word is not used all that often in my experience, but you'll still find it sometimes in, at least in university catalogs. Axiology, so axios meaning something of value or something of worth, and again our logos, or science or reasoned account thereof. Axiology is generally, at least in the universities where axiology is still on the books, is generally broken down into two more categories. We'll look at that in a few minutes, because things of value can have value in more than one way. Of course, and two general ways of looking at them are to see whether or not something is of moral value or ethical value, or whether or not something is of aesthetic or artistic value. And those two need not be the same in many people's minds. And so those might be two more aspects. So this is a very rough way of organizing things, as you're about to see. We're going to try and refine it a little bit, but in doing so, we may lose some of the main narrative. Okay. It's a picture wherein someone has tried to categorize philosophy as having 5 branches. Epistemology we've looked at, that's the study of knowledge. Metaphysics, we alluded to that, right? That's thinking about what's real. Political philosophy is included in this particular list, but as you'll see, there's another list of 5 we're about to turn to that substitutes something else for that. Ethics, morality, politics, living well. So you can see, if politics is actually part of ethics, then political philosophy might want to be subsumed under ethics too, and in some people's lists it is, right? And then finally, aesthetics, that other half of the axiology, third, in when we have a tripartite breakdown, okay? Sometimes logic, which is the logic of reasoning, the reasoned account of how one reasons, that is often substituted for politics. And we're going to presume basic rationality on the part of ourselves and those that we're trying to learn from in this class. We're not going to teach it over much. We will look at some informal fallacies with the hope that we can avoid them better once we've learned to be on the lookout for them. And then we'll practice covertly, if not overtly, um, reasonable discourse throughout this class, both in writing and in speech. Um, but we're not going to delve too deeply into logic as a study in its own right. It's very interesting, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's inclined at all that way, and especially to those who are not. It can be very helpful, especially if you think I'm not that kind of a logic-minded person. It might be just the class for some of you. Anyway, so let's see what else we can do. Move on a little bit. Look a little more closely at epistemology. These slides are available for you to read. And so rather than work through them in detail, I just want to look at a couple of the questions that might come up when people were engaged in acts of epistemology. These are general questions, ones that have been asked over and over and over again, but with good reason, because the answers, if any, are still, in most cases, debatable. So these are good questions. And they would roughly be categorized, I think, as epistemological questions. So just for the record, right? What's the difference between knowledge and belief? That is, what's the difference between saying, I know this is going to happen, and simply having a very strong conviction that this will happen? Are those the same? Do we use the words the same way? I think usually we make a distinction between what I know and what I think I know. And in that regard, we may be making a distinction between knowledge and belief. But I don't want to forestall any of your thoughts along these lines. I just want to point that out as a question that's probably worth asking. Here's one that maybe seems a little weightier. What can we know with certainty? What can we be sure of? How can we even know if we can know? Is there something we might be able to know just by reasoning, not by having to experience the world in some way, but simply by sitting and thinking? Are there things we can know that way alone? Are there things that we can truly know by experiencing the world with our senses? Or would that be better considered something else, maybe belief or simple experience in need of belief and or justification to become knowledge? You see, these questions are just a start on the kind of questions you might ask when you're dealing with the broad topic of knowledge. So let that do for now as a brief picture of the kinds of questions that epistemology often considers. Oops. And we'll go to the next one. What's the next one? Metaphysics. And we'll just run through a few metaphysical questions. Do you remember metaphysics is a catch-all phrase for talking about what seems to be really real, right? So here's a few questions. Are there unchanging elements to the universe, or does everything change? Some things seem to be changing. Time seems to be passing. As I sit here, the fans are spinning around. Your attention's probably beginning to flag. So change seems to be taking place, but of course I'm not sure it's taking place. It just seems to be taking place. But other things seem to be staying the same. I'm roughly still in the same position as I was when I began talking to you this way. So it's a fair question. Does everything change? Or do some things change and some things not? Or does nothing change? Good questions. Is there cause and effect going on in the world? I mean, I act as if there is all the time, but I'm not necessarily certain that it's not just an act. Maybe I'm so good at acting, I've fooled myself. Another question, one that comes up frequently, one that a lot of people like to try and avoid, not because they think it's an unimportant question, but because they think it's a contentious question and perhaps potentially rude. But it's a question that surely we will encounter more than once in the course of our class together. So there should be no harm in hearing it said out loud for the first time. Is there a God? Does God exist? For that matter, if God exists, why is there so much evil in this world of ours? I know some of you are already thinking of potential answers. One of them might involve the next question. Do I actually have a free will? I feel like I have a free will. But do I have a choice in that? perhaps my favorite conversation stopper. Should be a conversation starter, but it's, my experience, it usually results in generating a conversational void. Is this last one? Why is there something at all, rather than nothing? Seems it might have been an easier option. Right. Well, those are kinds of questions one can toy with in metaphysics. Ethics. You could make a pretty plausible argument that the most important of all of these might be ethics, because it's the one that involves actually doing things or not doing things to yourself and to other people. Whether or not these things that you're doing are right or wrong, yeah, justified, unjustified, legitimate or illegitimate, good or bad. Those kinds of things that probably every society that's ever existed has paid a lot of attention to and has tried to instill in its young. But it's one thing to be taught something by rote as a youngster. It's another thing to stop and reflect upon what you've been taught. And when you're doing that, you may be engaging in philosophy, and specifically in the philosophy, the branch of philosophy that's considered ethics and morals, using those terms interchangeably. If anyone's interested, you can look into how those terms are sometimes considered to be simultaneous, identical, and at other times considered to be two different categories. There's no fixed agreement on that as far as I know, but I'm going to use them interchangeably for now. Right. So, ethical questions. Here's just a couple. I can tell you before I get started, it is an inclination of mine, as far as I can tell, and has been for some time, to seek out my own happiness. I prefer to be happy than to be unhappy. I'm just constituted that way. I don't know why. I hope it doesn't make me seem odd, but I do prefer to be happy when I can, or if I can. And so I try and remember to do those things that I think will make me happy. Seems reasonable to me. But what are the limits of that? That's what this question is asking. Should I pursue my own happiness exclusively? Or is there something greater than my own happiness at stake in my own life? Am I part of something larger, or should I be part of something larger? Should my concerns at least extend to the happiness of those around me? Maybe just to those I care about deeply and positively. Or maybe to everybody around me. Maybe not just everybody, but to every sentient being. Who knows where you're supposed to draw these lines? That's an ethical question. And here's another one, a little more focused perhaps. When asked what's right or what's wrong, often people will give a knee-jerk response, but when asked why is your response the one that you think is correct, it's a little harder. And so people often are asked to ground their judgments, or their assertions rather, by means of a logical connection to a higher principle, or a deeper principle, or a broader principle. And so that's what's being gotten at here in this question. What's the foundation of one's ethics? Not just of the particular ethical judgment, but of one's overall body of ethics. Where does it come from? I know where I learned mine, in part from my parents, in part from my siblings and peers, in part from television. And that was by the age of 2. That process was already well underway. It's gotten more complicated since then, but it hasn't necessarily gotten any more fun or any easier to understand. But there's still hope. I can't say as I'm young yet, but I'm still working on some of these issues myself. I'll let you know when I get to anything that I can consider worth sharing. But for now, let's just ask this question. Where do our ethics come from? A lot of people in our culture particularly are going to say our ethics come from some source that's not purely human. It's maybe passed down from human generation to human generation. But the origin of it is something like the Ten Commandments or something. So this question is asking, is the foundation of ethics based on the Bible or another supernatural source? Or, it's a quick or. In fact, I think there maybe is a false dichotomy here. There may be more than just this other choice. Is it supernatural, or is it based on the very nature of human beings? Or is it based on neither? Could it be based on both? Seems logically the answer is going to have to be no, but I'll leave you guys to think about that. Let's move on. Aesthetics. That's the other half of the axiology, along with ethics and morals. If you break things up into just three. It's a wonderful field of philosophy, but it seems to get somewhat short shrift. I hope I'm wrong about that, but it's my experience with American universities is aesthetics is often an afterthought in the program in philosophy, which is a shame because so much of philosophy is beautiful. And a fair bit of philosophy is about what it means for things to be beautiful. That's aesthetics. So here's a couple of aesthetic questions that I hope will register with you. Thinking about art. Art is often thought of as a particularly human way of dealing with sensations and feelings, experiences. So aesthetics, sure, it ought to have something to say about the particular part of aesthetic interaction called art. So here's a question about art. Is art just things like fine art, like music and literature and painting? Or, as the example you asked, could a good engineering solution, or even just a beautiful sunset, be considered a work of art? Perhaps. If it's a beautiful sunset, I think a natural question is, if it's a work of art, point to the artist, show me the artist. Or is it possible for something to come to be a work of art without an artist being involved? What would that be like? These are aesthetic questions are so much fun. I don't want to run this into the ground, so I'm just going to skip through a few more and let you guys get back to your own thinking. But here's a few more. Famously, it's been said that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is often thought to be the aim of art. It's not always thought to be the aim of art. In fact, there's been a movement against seeing art in those terms for a long time, in relatively recent times. I think the arc is swinging back in some quarters, but that's fine. But if beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then maybe art too is in the eye of the beholder. That might have something to do with answering our first question. But if everything is just in the eye of the beholder, I wonder why we like to talk about these things so much. If it's your judgment and your judgment only that decides whether something is beautiful, or for that matter, whether something is a work of art, and my judgment is going to decide it for me, and neither of our judgments are impeachable because both of them are the ones that we choose to make, then I'm not sure why we bother to try and convince each other to change our minds. And yet, I can't help but perhaps this is what makes me such an annoying person to be around. But if there's something that I particularly find beautiful, a piece of music or passage in literature, my first impulse is to want to share it. Why would I wish to do that if I had no reason to believe that there might be something that I saw in, say, that piece of music or that passage of literature that could be seen by somebody else in something like the same way, even though this beholder's eyes and that beholder's eyes are two different sets of eyes. So, another aesthetic question. It's one that seems like it comes in and out of fashion in my experience. I think over time it's time for it to come back maybe and be debated again. Is it possible for something to be a good work of art even though it's morally not good at all? Maybe morally atrocious, morally heinous? Can something like Riefenstahl's film of the Nazis marching around in triumph of the will with their shining spades and their beautifully choreographed goose-stepping routines. It's an impressive piece of cinema, and some might even say it's a piece of cinematic art. But what it is capturing and what it is, I would argue, promoting or attempting to promote through that capture and through its presentation is an atrocious message. It's Nazism. Should we consider Lili Riefenstahl's work art, even though most people would probably agree that it's at least also propaganda? Should we tolerate it, given how intolerable we find Nazism to be? Who's this we? I hope you're with me on that one at least. Sort of touched on the last question already. What's the difference between good and bad art? Between art and propaganda? For that matter, between art and pornography? Can pornography be art? And if so, what's the difference between artistic pornography and the regular kind? Sounds like something you might want to do some research on. I don't know. Well, I'll leave you to think about that. In this list, political philosophy is still considered one of them. So we'll take a look at a few questions and what you might encounter if you were to say take a class in social political philosophy. The big one right up front. If we have a choice of political systems, well, I think our first choice might be, should we? Yes or no? Do we want a political system? Maybe it's not avoidable, right? But maybe it is. Maybe there are good reasons to have a particular system or any system. Maybe not. That might be an opening question in a social political philosophy class. Or maybe you skip right past that and get to something that's a little easier to wrap your hands around. This one, what is the best political system? Assuming we can choose. Democracy has a lot of supporters. Seems that's how it should be. It's mimetic reduplication, I guess. Oligarchy, that is sort of a smaller group of people with perhaps wealth and power and prestige and family connections, managing the situations so the rest of us can go on about our pro-like duties. Or maybe a straight up monarchy, small group of people related by blood ties or some other kind of exclusionary relationship to the rest of the world. Maybe even just one person. At least that person probably is in a better position to understand their own mind, perhaps, and get their own point of view across. And so if efficiency is what you're looking for, then perhaps that'd be the way to go. I don't know, I'd ask Shakespeare about that, whether or not as one ascends the ladder towards supremacy as a monarch, whether one gets closer or further away from knowing your own mind. So I want to take a literature class and come back and address that question. I don't know. Anyway, the second question really, I guess in a way, touches on my initial pre-question question. Can a person really achieve a purpose outside of a political system? Or are we, by nature, Aristotle says we are, political animals? Do we have to be organized in some way to be who we are or to become what we want to be? Another very good and very persistent question about which many people have weighed in on all different aspects of the spectrum. Which is more important, stability or innovation, security or liberty? Very big questions, succinctly expressed, but very big questions if you think about it. Which I'm going to leave you to do. And I'm going to say for now, I think we're done. Yeah, we can stop this at this point. And I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to thank you for your time. And I'm going to end this video here.